Hi, I'm Nancy Reyner, author of Acrylic Illuminations, Reflective and Luminous Acrylic Painting Techniques. I'll be demonstrating one of the 50 techniques in the book. The techniques create special painting effects using refraction, reflection, and using light for eye-catching ways. These techniques can be used in several ways in a painting, as backgrounds, in specific selected areas, in separate layers, or if worked fully, can create a painting in itself. This next technique is number 24, embedded pearlized color. And it uses the very unusual and interesting effects that you can get with interference paints. Interference paints are very unusual paints. Usually a paint has color because of a certain pigment that's used. Say burnt sienna is a regular paint color. It uses burnt sienna pigment in a binder to create burnt sienna paint. But the interference are unusual. They do not have pigment to create the color. Now interference come in a variety of colors. Here is interference red, interference gold, interference violet, and these all say different colors on them, but there's no red, gold, or violet pigment in them making the color. Instead, the interference are made of, do you see the mica chips here? They're made very, very microscopic small pieces of mica chip that are coated with titanium dioxide. So that is a pigment, but they're all coated with the same titanium dioxide. It's the thickness of the coating that will make the color, it refracts different portions of the color spectrum. So an interference violet is mica chips coated with titanium dioxide with a certain thickness that refracts the violet portion of the color spectrum. And that's a very unusual type of paint. Some of you might have seen them on cars. Actually, the interference were developed by the car industry to attract us to buy new cars. So sometimes you'll see a car and it has a quality where the colors flip as the car moves or you move away from the car. So I'd like to there's several techniques in the book that use the interference. This one in particular, I called it embedded pearlized color because I found that when the interference is used thickly, it creates a very interesting, beautiful, pearly, magical quality. So let's just look at the interference first. Here is just a board with some black paint on it and white because I wanted to show you how the paint looks very different on a dark surface or a light surface. So here's the interference violet. It also comes in a fluid form. This is the interference blue in a fluid. So this technique will work with the fluid paints or the thick paints. But let's just look at the interference first. Here is interference violet. And when you look at it very thinly, so either scraping it or brushing it with a brush very thinly, or rubbing it with a rag, we have what's called an undertone and a mass tone. The undertone is where the color shows very vibrantly on a dark surface. And this could be black or dark green or dark blue, but anything dark, it really comes up. And if I take this violet and put it over where the black and the white meet, you can see it's very transparent, thinly. So if I use it thickly though, look what happens. It's not only does it turn opaque, but it also has a very beautiful quality to it. So the interference can be used thinly over dark, thinly over light, or thickly over dark, or thickly over light. Those four ways all give very different effects. And here is an example of interference blue. I did a brush stroke of interference blue and a brush stroke of interference gold. Here's the blue and here's the gold. And it's over dark and light background. And it's thick and thin, just so you can see the quality changes. Interference are very interesting to work with. Because they need access to the light to create this effect, I recommend not using any matte products, a matte medium, a matte varnish, because a matte medium and matte varnish have white powder, white particles in them that will cloud or put a veil between this paint and light, and then you won't get this effect. Also, when you're working with the interference, you can mix paint, colored paint, in with the interference. But the more paint you add, the more you might affect how that paint, how the interference is refracting the color spectrum. Here is the interference violet. Here is the interference violet thinly over black. And I'm moving it to shift it. And I don't know if you could see this in the monitor, but I'm moving it so that you can see that the quality of the color really changes. For this technique, you'll need the following materials. You'll need a surface. And here I have a white surface, but you can also choose to use a dark surface. As you can see, it will totally change what you're doing, because even though it's very opaque when you use it thickly, it still will show the background or the surface through. You'll also need several fluid paints. I recommend the fluid paints for this technique. So I have a bunch of these fluid paints. You can use the thick paint too, but you'll see I'm going to be putting a drop of paint down, and it's easy to swirl when they're in the fluid form. The other tools you'll need are some kind of a mixing knife and a plate or cups with lids to mix, and then the general painting tools such as water in a container and paper towels. You'll also need some type of textural tool to create some texture, and I've been having fun with these catalyst tools. They come in long-handled or short, and they have these interesting patterns to them. I don't know if you can see there. You can do this technique with pure, straight interference paint, but you can save money by taking a gel, a gloss gel. Remember I said try not to use matte gels. This is regular gel gloss. Gels are a lot less expensive than anything with the pigment or these mica chips in it. So you can make any kind of mixture you want. You can take a 50-50 mixture of gel and the interference. That'll still give quite a punch to the interference color. I'm going to start with this white surface, and because it doesn't have any sides on it, I like to lift it up. So I have these little jars to lift it off the surface so that I can work off the edge. And now I'm going to make a mixture using the regular gel gloss and any interference that I want. But the idea with this is going to be that I want a very, very thick layer. So I'm going to need a lot. If you just use a thin amount of this, you're not going to get that magical pearly quality that you could get when you use it thickly. So that's why I like to save some money by extending it with the gel. And gels come in different thicknesses. You can use a soft, a regular, heavy, extra heavy, depending on what kind of stiffness you want. And any gel will work for this demonstration except for matte gels. You don't want to use matte. 1/4 inch thick or more. So that's why you're going to need something about this much for this small surface. So here's interference red. And that's probably about a 1 to, I don't know, this looks like more like 1 part interference to 3 parts gel. It'll all work. The gels are white and they dry clear and glossy, allowing that interference to then do its magical thing. So I'm going to mix it up. Now, you don't have to mix it too homogeneously. You can make what I call a dirty mix. You can kind of keep it like that so that the interference has different qualities in there. Or you can mix it up nice and homogeneously. And I'm just going to, this is like baking, a cooking show. Right? Okay. And now I'm going to spread it out, and see, it's really helpful when you prop it up because you can spread it out a little bit. Let's see if I have enough. Acrylic shrinks down in volume by 30%. So if you only did a 1/4 inch, you're going to end up with still a pretty thin layer. So if you spread it out and you don't have enough, then just mix up another batch. This is going to stay wet for a long time because gloss gels take a long time to dry. Okay, so here it is. For me, this is a little skimpy. I would like to do twice as much, but this will still work. And here's why. I'm going to now add drops of color, and I'm going to move them and swirl them in the gel. If it's too thin a layer, you're just going to be scraping the bottom, and it won't be as fun, and it won't look as interesting. So what I'm going to do is take a few drops of color. This is quinacridone burnt orange. And here is phthalo green yellow shade. I should have cleaned my paints before I... Notice I'm not putting a lot of color, just a small amount. This is quinacridone magenta. And I wouldn't put any more than that. That doesn't look like much color, does it? Can you guys see? It's not much color, but the colors are pretty powerful, even in the fluid form. And now I'm going to move them and swirl them through. And this will turn into, I told you this was a cooking show, right? Here it is dry. And when the gel, the white of the gel goes clear, then you can start to see how it does all that kind of magical shifting. I'll do it for the monitor. And I don't know if you can see this, but the interference when it's without color added, just the plain, this is the interference red course. When it's over a light color and you move it, it does a complementary flip. So the red is going to go red-green. And if I used interference violet in the gel, then it would go violet-yellow. And the other complementary pair is blue-orange. So for the next layer on this, so everybody gets that this is what I just did dry, which might take about a day in Santa Fe, where it's dry, or a week on the East Coast, where it's wet. So now it's dry. And also, look at how it looks almost flat. There's a little bit of texture. It's not very textural. Look how textural this is. When it shrinks down by 30%, you don't see all the lumps as much. So don't be as worried with too much texture, because it keeps shrinking down. And when you keep putting layers on top, you keep smoothing over the texture. So I'm going to use the same regular gel gloss. And I'm going to mix, this time, the interference gold into it. And with my knife, I'm mixing it up. And again, you can do a dirty mix by mixing a little bit and letting it work like that, or you can keep mixing until it's all homogenized. And then you put it on top of this layer. Take the knife, and I'm spreading it out. There's I use this palette knife, but you can also use some fancier catalyst tools to smooth them out. See, that's not enough. I think I'd like more, but it'll work for the demonstration. This is about the least amount of gel you can use to get an interesting effect. And now I can use this is iridescent gold. So I'm going to do the same thing. And swirl it around. Now it looks like this layer is completely covering the other layer, but that white gel goes totally clear. It's a fun painting with acrylic because you're always surprised when it's dry. And now I'd like to use one of the textural tools. The catalyst tool works. You can use combs,
credit cards, anything that has texture in it. And if I run this through and create some texture, I can then come back with the knife and smooth out some areas. Try it again in different ways. Scrape this off, put it back on. And again, it looks really gloppy and looks like pretty opaque. But this becomes this. Sorry. And look at how it looks like there's no way that this painting dried to this, because this looks so gloppy and opaque. Here, I'll put them next to each other on the monitor. But this shrinks down by 30% and clears up. So that's why the end result is always very, very different than in its wet form. Here is the finished dried board and used as a background for the butterfly. I'm really taking advantage of the unusual qualities of the interference paint and using them very thickly and saving money using it thickly by adding the gel in with it and working with it in separate layers. And I think that the trick is to not put too much color in it so that you still have that transparency and some areas where you have just the interference on that white board without any color in it. When you look at the butterfly and you flip it, that's how I tell if something's got interference on it. You move it and shift the light on it. You can see the blue here has blue interference paint on it. So I don't have to use interference paint, but since I have interference underneath, and then I painted the butterfly pretty much with black paint, then I put some interference on the top. I like to do that when I layer. I like to repeat certain techniques and certain types of paint in different layers so that when you look at it, it becomes more of an integrated mystery, rather than, oh, interference on the bottom with a painting on top. Again, the book really emphasizes these eye-catching effects. Interference paint, metallic paint, the iridescent paint. Remember, I put iridescent gold in this too. Metal leaf, and when you start combining them all, it starts to get very exciting and playful and fun.